Good afternoon, Isaac Litton students. This is your librarian, Miss Garrett, here to give you a little bit of an overview of the library this year. In case we haven't met, my name's Miss Garrett. I'm originally from Kentucky. I taught high school Spanish in Kentucky and New York City for 6 years before I moved to Nashville. This is my 7th year at Litton. And a little bit about me, I love dogs, I have 2 of my own, I love houseplants, and I love reading, and I love talking to people about any of those. One thing I want to make sure that all students know about is that we have a new reading challenge this year. It runs now through October 16th. It's called I Believe in Nashville, and we're going to be competing against students from other schools, as well as competing against students in other grades at our school. You're allowed to read any book for this challenge. You just log your minutes, just like we did for the Public Library Summer Reading Challenge. To access Beanstack, which is where we are going to be logging our minutes, go to clever.com and then look for the little icon that says Beanstack. I have instructions for logging minutes in English and in Spanish in the ILMS Library Schoology group, which everyone should already be a member of. Anyone who participates will be entered in a drawing to win free books, and obviously you'll have bragging rights. Another program that we're participating in this year is Project Lit Community. I'm going to be working on this with Miss Karandakar. And so Project Lit is basically a book club, but it's a bit cooler than that. So it's a grassroots reading initiative devoting to having high interest, diverse, and own voices books read widely throughout many communities. It was started by an English teacher at Maplewood High School, and now it's nationwide. One bonus is that you get a free copy of the books that we read. The first book selection for September is called Born a Crime. We do horrible things to one another because we don't see the person it affects. We don't see them as people. Trevor Noah, host of The Daily Show on Comedy Central, shares his remarkable story of growing up in South Africa with a black South African mother and a white European father at a time when it was against the law for a mixed-race child to exist. But he did exist, and from the beginning, the often misbehaved Trevor used his keen smarts and humor to navigate a harsh life under a racist government. In a country where racism barred blacks from social, educational, and economic opportunity, Trevor surmounted staggering obstacles and created a promising future for himself thanks to his mom's unwavering love and indomitable will. Here's Trevor Noah talking about his book.
My book is about, I guess, my life growing up in South Africa as a mixed race child in South Africa, which wasn't common at the time at all because the time that I was growing up was a period of our history called apartheid. And so my mother's a Xhosa woman, my father's Swiss. I was, I guess, a mixture of the two. And I grew up during this time, which led to a series of fascinating and fun stories. Some of them very painful, but I guess I find the comedy in everything. And this book brings it all together.
If you're like me and like to read books before you get to see the movie, make sure you read this soon because they are starting to produce a movie. Another thing I want to make sure students know is that you do still have access to Limitless Libraries. So it's the exact same website, www.limitlesslibraries.org. It's a little bit different because now you have different ways to pick up library items. They no longer ship them to the school, and unfortunately, they do not ship them to our homes. But what you can do is select a public library branch as a pickup location, and Madison Library into Lytton. If you aren't able to make it to the library, or if you would just prefer to read on your phone, tablet, or computer, you also have the option to check out ebooks or e-audiobooks. Your student login information is the same as last year. Your library card number is your student ID number, your 190 number, and your PIN is your birthday without the year. So for example, April 19th, the PIN would be 0419. Starting tomorrow, you're going to have lessons during your PLT time surrounding digital citizenship. We'll be working together on 3 digital citizenship lessons this year, and it's the same lessons that students at other MMPS schools will be getting. So once you finish this video, make sure you complete discussion board number 1 to let me know what you already know about digital citizenship and how you feel about the school year. At this point, you can leave to work on your discussion board or stay to hear the first chapter of Born a Crime. Chapter 1. Run. I was 9 years old when my mother threw me out of a moving car. It happened on a Sunday. I know it was on a Sunday because we were coming home from church, and every Sunday in my childhood meant church. We never missed church. My mother was, and still is, a deeply religious woman, very Christian. Like indigenous peoples around the world, black South Africans adopted the religion of our colonizers. By adopt, I mean it was forced on us. My childhood involved church, or some form of church, at least 4 nights a week. Tuesday night was the prayer meeting. Wednesday night was Bible study. Thursday night was youth church. Friday and Saturday we had off. Then on Sunday we went to church. 3 churches to be precise. The reason we went to 3 churches was because my mom said each church gave her something different. The first church offered jubilant praise of the Lord. The second church offered deep analysis of the scripture, which my mom loved. The third church offered passion and catharsis. It was a place where you truly felt the presence of the Holy Spirit inside you. Completely by coincidence, as we moved back and forth between these churches, I noticed that each one had its own distinct racial makeup. Jubilant church was mixed church. Analytical church was white church. And passionate, cathartic church, that was black church. Mixed church was Rhema Bible Church. Rhema was one of those huge, super modern suburban megachurches. The pastor, Ray McCauley, was an ex-bodybuilder with a big smile and the personality of a cheerleader. Pastor Ray had competed in the 1974 Mr. Universe competition. He placed 3rd. The winner that year was Arnold Schwarzenegger. Every week, Ray would go up on stage working really hard to make Jesus cool. There was arena-style seating and a rock band jamming with the latest Christian contemporary pop. Everyone sang along, and if you didn't know the words, that was okay because they were all right up there on the Jumbotron for you. It was Christian karaoke, basically. I always had a blast at mixed church. White church was Rosebank Union in Sandton, a very white and very wealthy part of Johannesburg. I loved white church because I didn't actually have to go to the main service. My mom would go to that, and I would go to the youth side, to Sunday school. In Sunday school, we got to read cool stories. Noah and the flood was obviously a favorite. I had a personal stake there. But I also loved the stories about Moses parting the Red Sea, David slaying Goliath, Jesus whipping the money changers in the temple. I grew up in a home with very little exposure to popular culture. My mom didn't want my mind polluted by sex and violence. The only music I really knew was from church. Soaring, uplifting songs praising Jesus. It was the same with movies. The Bible was my action movie. Samson was my superhero. He was my He-Man. A guy beating 1,000 people to death with the jawbone of a donkey? That's pretty fierce. Eventually you get to Paul writing letters to the Ephesians and it loses the plot. But the Old Testament and the Gospels, I could quote you anything from those pages, chapter and verse. There were Bible games and quizzes every week at White Church, and I always trounced everyone. Then there was Black Church. There was always some kind of Black Church service going on somewhere, and we tried them all. In the township, that typically meant an outdoor, tent revival-style church. We usually went to my grandmother's church, an old-school Methodist congregation, 500 African grannies in blue and white blouses, clutching their Bibles and patiently burning in the hot African sun. Black Church was rough. No air conditioning. No lyrics up on the Jumbotrons. And it lasted forever. 3 or 4 hours at least, which confused me because White Church was only like an hour. In and out, thanks for coming. But at Black Church, I would sit there for what felt like an eternity, trying to figure out why time moves so slowly. I eventually decided Black people needed more time with Jesus because we suffered more. Black Church had one saving grace. If I could make it to the 3rd or 4th hour, I'd get to watch the pastor cast demons out of people. People possessed by demons would start running up and down the aisles like madmen, screaming in tongues. The ushers would tackle them, like bouncers at a club, and hold them down. The pastor would grab their heads and violently shake them back and forth, shouting, "I cast out this spirit in the name of Jesus." Some pastors were more violent than others, but what they all had in common was that they wouldn't stop until the demon was gone and the congregant had gone limp and collapsed on the stage. The person had to fall, because if he didn't fall, that meant the demon was powerful and the pastor needed to come at him even harder. You could be a linebacker in the NFL. Didn't matter. That pastor was taking you down. Good Lord, that was fun. Christian karaoke, fierce action stories, and violent faith healers. Man, I loved church. The thing I didn't love was the lengths we had to go to in order to get to church. It was an epic slog. We lived in Eden Park, a tiny suburb way outside Johannesburg. It took us an hour to get to White Church, another 45 minutes to get to Mixed Church, and another 45 minutes to drive out to Soweto for Black Church. Then, if that wasn't bad enough, some Sundays we'd drive back to White Church for a special evening service. By the time we finally got home at night, I'd collapse into bed. This particular Sunday, the Sunday I was hurled from a moving car, started out like any other Sunday. My mother woke me up, made me porridge for breakfast. I took my bath while she dressed my baby brother Andrew, who was 9 months old. Then we went out to the driveway, but once we were all strapped in and ready to go, the car wouldn't start. My mom had this ancient, broken down, tangerine Volkswagen Beetle that she picked up for next to nothing, and it was always breaking down. To this day, I hate secondhand cars. I'll take a new car with a warranty every time. As much as I love church, taking public transport meant the slog would be twice as long and twice as hard. When the Volkswagen refused to start, I was praying, "Please say we'll just stay home. Please say we'll just stay home." Then I glanced over to see the determined look I saw on my mother's face, her jaw set, and I knew I had a long day ahead of me. "Come," she said, "we're going to catch minibuses." My mother is as stubborn as she is religious. Once her mind's made up, that's it. "It's the devil," she said about the stalled car. "The devil doesn't want us to go to church. That's why we've got to catch minibuses." Whenever I found myself up against my mother's faith-based obstinacy, I would try, as respectfully as possible, to counter with an opposing point of view. "Or," I said, "the Lord knows that today we shouldn't go to church, which is why he made sure the car wouldn't start, so that we'd stay at home as a family and take a day of rest, because even the Lord rested." Ah, that's the devil talking, Trevor. No, because Jesus is in control, and if Jesus is in control and we pray to Jesus, he would let the car start, but he hasn't, therefore... No, Trevor. Sometimes Jesus puts obstacles in your way to see if you overcome them. Like Job, this could be a test. Ah, yes, Mom, but the test could be to see if we're willing to accept what has happened and stay home and praise Jesus for his wisdom. No, that's the devil talking. But Mom, Trevor, Sanquela. Sanquela is a phrase with many shades of meaning. It means, don't undermine me, don't underestimate me, and just try me. It's a command and a threat all at once. It's a common thing for Xhosa parents to say to their kids. Anytime I heard it, I knew it meant the conversation was over, and if I uttered another word, I was in for a hiding. At the time, I attended a private Catholic school called Maryvale College. I was the champion of the Maryvale Sports Day every single year, and my mom won the Mom's Trophy every single year. Why? Because she was always chasing me to give me a hiding, and I was always running to not get the hiding. Nobody ran like me and my mom. We had a very Tom and Jerry relationship. She was the strict disciplinarian. I was incorrigibly naughty. She would send me out to buy groceries, and I wouldn't come right home because I'd be using the change from the milk and bread to play arcade games at the supermarket. I loved video games. I was a master at Street Fighter. I could go on forever on a single play. I'd drop a coin in, time would fly, and the next thing I knew there'd be a woman behind me with a belt. It was a race. I'd take off out the door and through the dusty streets of Eden Park, clambering over walls, ducking through backyards. It was a normal thing in our neighborhood. Everybody knew that Trevor child would come charging through and his mom would be right there behind him. She could go at a full sprint in high heels, but if she really wanted to come after me, she'd do this weird move with her ankles and the heels would go flying and she wouldn't even miss a step. That's when I knew. Okay, she's in turbo mode right now. When I was little, she always caught me, but as I got older, I got faster, and when speed failed her, she'd use her wits. If I was about to get away, she'd yell, "Stop! Thief!" knowing it would bring the whole neighborhood out against me. Then I'd have strangers trying to grab and tackle me, and I'd have to duck and dive and dodge them as well, all while screaming, "I'm not a thief! I'm her son!" The last thing I wanted to do that Sunday morning was climb into some crowded minibus, but the second I heard my mom say Sonquela, I knew my fate was sealed. She gathered up Andrew and we climbed out of the Volkswagen and went out to try to catch a ride. I was 5 years old, nearly 6, when Nelson Mandela was released from prison. I remember seeing it on TV and everyone being happy. I didn't know why we were happy, just that we were. I was aware of the fact that there was a thing called apartheid, and it was ending, and that it was a big deal, but I didn't understand the intricacies of it. What I do remember, what I will never forget, is the violence that followed. The triumph of democracy over apartheid is sometimes called the Bloodless Revolution. It is called that because very little white blood was spilled. Black blood ran in the streets. As the apartheid regime fell, we knew that the black man was now going to rule. The question was, which black man? Spates of violence broke out between the Inkatha Freedom Party and the ANC, the African National Congress, as they jockeyed for power. The political dynamic between these two groups was very complicated, but the simplest way to understand it as a proxy war between Zulu and Xhosa. The Inkatha was predominantly Zulu, very militant and very nationalistic. The ANC encompassed many different tribes, but its leaders at the time were primarily Xhosa. Instead of uniting for peace, they turned on one another, committing acts of unbelievable savagery. Massive riots broke out. In the evenings, my mom and I would turn on our little black and white TV and watch the news. 12 people killed, 50 people killed, 100 people killed. Ultimately, thousands of people died. Eden Park sat not far from the sprawling townships in East Rand, Tokosa, and Catalang, which were the sites of some of the most horrific Inkatha ANC clashes. Once a month at least we'd drive home and the neighborhood would be on fire. Hundreds of rioters in the street. My mom would edge the car slowly through the crowds and around blockades made of flaming tires. Nothing burns like a tire. It rages with a fury you can't imagine. Whenever the riots broke out, all our neighbors would wisely hole up behind closed doors. But not my mom. She'd head straight out, and as we'd inch our way past the blockades, she'd give the rioters this look. Let me pass. I'm not involved in this chaos. She was unwavering in the face of danger. That always amazed me. It didn't matter that there was a war on our doorstep. She had things to do, places to be. It was the same stubbornness that kept her going to church despite a broken down car. That carless Sunday, we made our circuit of churches, ending up at White Church. When we walked out of Rosebank Union, it was dark and we were alone. It had been an endless day of minibuses and I was exhausted. It was 9 o'clock at least. In those days, with all the violence and riots going on, you did not want to be out that late at night. When we were standing at the corner of Jellicoe Avenue and Oxford Road, right in the heart of Johannesburg's wealthy white suburbia, and there were no minibuses. The streets were empty. I so badly wanted to turn to my mom and say, "You see, this is why God wanted us to stay home." But one look at the expression on her face, and I knew better than to speak. We waited and waited for a minibus to come. Under apartheid, the government provided no public transportation for blacks, but white people still needed us to show up, to mop their floors and clean their bathrooms. Necessity being the mother of invention, black people created their own transit system, an informal network of bus routes controlled by private associations operating entirely outside of the law. Different groups ran different routes, and they would fight over who controlled what. There was bribery and general shadiness that went on, a great deal of violence, and a lot of protection money paid to avoid violence. The one thing you didn't do was steal a route from a rival group. Drivers who stole routes would get killed. Being unregulated, minibuses were also very unreliable. When they came, they came. When they didn't, they didn't. Standing outside Rosebank Union, I was literally falling asleep on my feet. Not a minibus in sight. Eventually my mother said, "Let's hitchhike." We walked, and after what felt like an eternity, a car drove up and stopped. The driver offered us a ride and we climbed in. We hadn't gone 10 feet when suddenly a minibus swerved right in front of the car and cut us off. A Zulu driver got out with an Iwisa, a large traditional Zulu weapon, a war club basically. It's used to smash people's skulls in. Another guy, his crony, got out of the passenger side. They walked up to the driver's side of the car we were in, grabbed the man who'd offered us a ride, pulled him out, and started shoving their clubs in his face. "Why are you stealing our customers? Why are you picking people up?" It looked like they were going to kill this guy. I knew that happened sometimes. My mom spoke up. "Hey, listen, he was just helping me. Leave him. We'll ride with you. That's what we wanted in the first place." So we got out of the first car and climbed into the minibus. We were the only passengers in the minibus. In addition to being violent gangsters, South African minibus drivers are notorious for complaining and haranguing passengers as they drive. This driver was a particularly angry one. As we rode along, he started lecturing my mother about being in a car with a man who was not her husband. My mother didn't suffer lectures from strange men. She told him to mind his own business, and when he heard her speaking in Xhosa, that really set him off. The stereotypes of Zulu and Xhosa women are as ingrained as those of the men. Zulu women were well-behaved and dutiful. Xhosa women were immoral and unfaithful. And here was my mother, his tribal enemy, a Xhosa woman alone with 2 small children, one of them a mixed child, no less. "Oh, you're a Xhosa," he said. "That explains it. Disgusting woman. Tonight you're going to learn your lesson." He sped off. He was driving fast and he wasn't stopping, only slowing down to check for traffic at the intersections before speeding through. Death was never very far away from anybody back then. My mother could be harmed. We could be killed. These were all viable outcomes. But I didn't fully comprehend the danger we were in. I was so tired that I just wanted to sleep. Plus, my mom stayed very calm. She didn't panic, so I didn't know to panic. She just kept trying to reason with him. "I'm sorry if we've upset you. You can just let us out here." "No." "Really, it's fine. We can just walk." "No." We raced along Oxford Road, the lanes empty, no other cars out. I was sitting closest to the minibus's sliding door. My mother sat next to me, holding baby Andrew. She looked out the window at the passing road and then leaned over to me and whispered, "Trevor, when he slows down at the next intersection, I'm going to open the door and we're going to jump." I didn't hear a word of what she was saying because at that point I'd completely nodded off. When we came to the next traffic light, the driver eased off the gas to look around and check the road. My mother reached over, pulled the sliding door open, grabbed me, and threw me out as far as she could. Then she took Andrew and leaped out behind me. It felt like a dream until the pain hit. Bam! I smacked hard on the pavement. My mother landed right beside me and we tumbled and tumbled and rolled and rolled. I was wide awake now. Eventually I came to a stop and pulled myself up, completely disoriented. I looked around and saw my mother, already on her feet. She turned and looked at me and screamed, "Run!" So I ran and she ran, and nobody ran like me and my mom. It's weird to explain, but I just knew what to do. It was animal instinct, learned in a world where violence was always lurking and waiting to erupt. In the townships, when the police came swooping in with their riot gear and armored cars and helicopters, I knew. Run for cover. Run and hide. I knew that as a 5-year-old. So like the gazelle runs from the lion, I ran. The men stopped the minibus and got out and tried to chase us, but they didn't stand a chance. We smoked them. I think they were in shock. I still remember glancing back and seeing them give up with a look of utter bewilderment on their faces. They didn't know they were dealing with the reigning champs of the Maryvale College sports days. We kept going until we made it to a 24-hour petrol station and called the police. By then, the men were long gone. I still didn't know what any of this had happened. I'd been running on pure adrenaline. Once we stopped, I realized how much pain I was in. I looked down and the skin on my arms was scraped and torn. I was cut up and bleeding all over. Mom was, too. My baby brother was fine, though incredibly still asleep. Though incredibly, my mom had wrapped herself around him and he'd come through without a scratch. I turned to her in shock. "What was that? Why are we running?" "What do you mean, why are we running? Those men were trying to kill us." "You never told me that. You just threw me out of the car." "I did tell you. Why didn't you jump?" "Jump? I was asleep." "So I should have left you there for them to kill you?" "At least they would have woken me up before they killed me." Back and forth we went. I was too confused and too angry about getting thrown out of the car to realize what had happened. My mother had saved my life. As we caught our breath and waited for the police to come and drive us home, she said, "Well, at least we're safe. Thank God." I wasn't going to keep quiet this time. "Look, Mom," I said, "I know you love Jesus, but maybe next week you could ask him to meet us at our house, because this really wasn't a fun night." She broke out in a huge smile and started laughing. I started laughing too, and we stood there, this little boy and his mom, our arms and legs covered in blood and dirt, laughing together in the light of a petrol station on the side of the road in the middle of the night.